"What kind of worthless junk did you give me?" my father said. And then he slapped me in front of 30 guests holding champagne glasses on the night of his 55th birthday in a house I had scrubbed on my hands and knees since sunrise. I ran out the front door with nothing but a backpack and a bruise on my cheek. I did not know it then, but that slap was the last thing Arthur Sterling would ever do to me, because by midnight, I would be sitting in a black SUV across from a stranger who would say 5 words that would unravel 18 years of lies. Before I go on, please take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if you genuinely connect with this story. Drop a comment telling me where you are watching from and what time it is there. My name is Maya. Though for most of my life, I was forced to answer to Chloe. I am 21. Now, let me take you back to that Saturday morning, the day Arthur Sterling turned 55 and the last day I spent under his roof. I set my alarm for 5 a.m. that morning, same as every Saturday. Except this Saturday came with a 2-page handwritten list Linda had left on the kitchen counter the night before. Sweep the patio. Arrange the folding chairs, 32 of them, one for each guest on Arthur's list. Press the tablecloth. Slice the lemons. Wash the high-end serving platters by hand because the dishwasher leaves spots. Their house sat on a quiet cul-de-sac in Walnut Creek, California, a 4-bedroom colonial with a manicured lawn. Arthur hired someone to mow, but told the neighbors I did. Inside, the dining table was solid oak, seats 12, polished weekly by me. On the counter, 2 cases of Napa Valley Cabernet and a 3-tier cake from a bakery that charged more for frosting than I earned in a week. My room was downstairs, not the finished basement, the storage closet next to the water heater. No window. A twin mattress Arthur had pulled from a curbside pile when I was 9. A wool blanket that smelled like damp cardboard no matter how many times I washed it. The lifestyle in Walnut Creek is all about appearances. If you live on a cul-de-sac, your hedges better be straight and your children better be perfect. To the world, Arthur was a pillar of the community, a guy who took in a foster kid and made her part of the family. But inside those walls, the air was different. It was heavy with the things I wasn't allowed to say. Every chore was a test I was expected to pass without thanks. If the silver wasn't polished to a mirror shine, I heard about it for a week. If I took too long in the shower, Linda would remind me whose water bill it was. My sister Sarah's room was upstairs. Queen bed, flat screen, a vanity mirror ringed with those Hollywood bulbs. She was 23 and still lived at home. Still had her credit card linked to Arthur's account. Still had not learned how to boil an egg because that was what I was for. I had spent 3 months saving for Arthur's gift, a leather wallet, real leather, from a department store in San Francisco. $84, which does not sound like much unless you are earning minimum wage scrubbing sheet pans at a diner. I wrapped it in craft paper because I could not afford a gift bag. I did not know, standing there in that kitchen at 5 in the morning with flour on my hands, that the wallet would be the last thing I ever gave that man. Arthur came downstairs at 10. Polo shirt, powder blue, khakis creased like knife edges, cologne so thick it reached me before he did. He walked the patio like a general inspecting his troops, moved one balloon cluster 6 inches to the left, stared at the lemon slices I had arranged on the water pitcher, and said without looking at me, "They are uneven. Do them again." Linda appeared at noon, hair blown out, pearl studs, a linen dress she had ordered online and made me steam. She inspected the kitchen, ran a finger along the countertop, and whispered something to Arthur I was not supposed to hear, but did. "She only got you something cheap. Just brace yourself." Sarah showed up last because of course she did. New dress, new highlights, new heels clicking across the floor I had waxed at 6 a.m. She handed Arthur an Apple Watch, the latest model, the one that retails for $700. She charged it to the supplementary credit card Arthur gave her for emergencies. Arthur opened it, beamed, and kissed her forehead. "This is my girl," he told the first guests walking through the door. He had his arm around Sarah. "She always knows what her old man likes." He did not look at me. He never did when other people were watching. I was the girl who carried trays, refilled glasses, wiped condensation rings off the coffee table before they could set. When one of the guests asked Linda, "Should not Chloe sit down and eat with us?" Linda smiled the way she always smiled, warm as a closed door, and said, "Oh, she likes to help. It is her way of showing gratitude. You know how it is with adopted ones." I kept carrying trays. It happened during the gift opening. Arthur sat at the head of the table like it was a throne. 30 guests arranged around him. Neighbors, church friends, a few co-workers from the insurance agency. Champagne flutes catching the patio string lights. Sarah perched on the armrest of his chair filming on her iPhone. Linda stood behind him, one hand on his shoulder, radiating the image of a woman who had everything figured out. I came forward with the craft paper package. I had written on the front in my best handwriting, "Happy birthday, Chloe." Arthur took it, weighted it in his hand. I remember thinking he might actually smile. He smiled sometimes when no one could accuse him of going soft, but then he tore the paper, pulled out the wallet, flipped it open, flipped it closed, and held it up like evidence at trial. "What kind of worthless junk did you give me?" His voice cut through the chatter. Conversation stopped. Forks paused midair. Someone set down a glass too carefully. I started to explain. "I saved up for 3 months. 3 months and this is all you got?" He stood. The chair scraped the stone. "Even the dog gets better treats." And then he hit me. Open palm right across the left side of my face. The sound was sharp and flat. The kind that does not echo because it does not need to. My head snapped sideways. A champagne flute fell off the table and shattered on the patio floor. And for a second, that was the only sound in the world. No one moved. Linda looked down at her plate. A man from Arthur's office studied his napkin. Sarah bit her lip and kept filming. One person stood. Mrs. Gable, the next-door neighbor, 70 years old and 5 feet tall. "Arthur, that was uncalled for." "Stay out of my family business," Arthur snapped. Mrs. Gable sat back down, but she did not look away from me, and I have never forgotten that. I stood there with the taste of copper on my tongue and a wallet on the ground between us, and I thought, that slap will be the best evidence the lawyers need. I did not understand that thought yet. I would not understand it for hours, but something inside me had already started counting. I did not go back to the party. I went to the storage closet, pulled my old backpack off the nail on the wall, and packed what I could. 2 shirts, 1 pair of jeans without holes, a toothbrush, a phone charger, the envelope I had found in the bottom of a box Arthur threw out last spring, and $340 in cash tip money I had hidden. That was everything I owned in this world. I walked through the living room on my way out. The party had resumed. Arthur was laughing at something someone said. Sarah was showing guests something on her phone. Linda stood at the window and watched me cross the front yard. She reached for the curtain and pulled it shut. Nobody called my name. Outside, the California air hit my face, and the sting on my cheek flared like a second slap. Walnut Creek at 9 p.m. is dark. Not city dark, but suburb dark, where the silence between houses feels deliberate. I walked along the main road, no destination, just a way. Behind me, the music from the party got softer and softer until it was nothing at all. I had made it maybe 2 miles when headlights slowed behind me. A black Cadillac Escalade, clean tinted windows, California plates. It rolled to a stop 10 feet ahead. The rear door opened and I should have run. Every instinct said run. But I was already so tired of running from things. I thought maybe just this once I would see what was running toward me. A man stepped out first. Mid-50s, tall, lean, wearing a charcoal coat that fits like someone measured him for it. His hair was dark brown threaded with silver. And his eyes, hazel green, wide set, catching the street light, were the exact same eyes I saw in my bathroom mirror Behind him, a woman, shorter, red-haired, sharp-featured, carrying a leather portfolio like she had just left a courtroom. She kept her distance, professional, watchful. The man's hands were trembling. I could see that even in the dark. "I am sorry to frighten you," he said. His voice cracked. "My name is Julian Whitlock and I believe I am your biological father." I took a step back. "That is not possible. My biological parents did not want me. That is what I was told." "You were told wrong." He reached into the inside pocket of his coat and pulled out a photograph. A woman holding a toddler. The woman had auburn hair and cheekbones like mine and a smile that leaned slightly to the left. The toddler had hazel green eyes. "Her name was Elena," he said. "She was your mother. She died in a car accident when you were 2, and I have spent every single day since then trying to find you." I looked at the photograph, then at him, then at the photograph again. The woman in it had the same mouth I did. The red-haired woman spoke, "My name is Samantha Reed. I am Mr. Whitlock's attorney. We have been monitoring your situation through legal channels for several months. Tonight, when our investigators saw you leave the house, we made the decision to approach. You were watching the house." Samantha nodded. "The birthday party, many guests. It was the safest opportunity to confirm your identity visually." She paused. "We also saw you run." I touched my cheek without thinking. The bruise pulsed under my fingertips. Julian Whitlock looked at the mark on my face and something behind his eyes broke very quietly. We sat in the back of the Escalade. Julian told me the story like a man who had rehearsed it for 18 years. Elena died on a highway in March. Julian was in the hospital for 4 months with a shattered pelvis and a collapsed lung. You were at home with a neighbor. While I was in the ICU, he said, Child Protective Services placed you in emergency foster care. When I got out and filed to bring you home, they told me I could not. A social worker named David Vance handled the case. Vance told the court that Julian had signed a document surrendering custody permanently. Vance presented the court with a signed form. The judge approved the adoption. I never signed anything, Julian said. I was on a ventilator. I could not hold a pen. But the court had a piece of paper with my name on it. By the time Julian hired a lawyer and challenged the ruling, it was too late. The adoption had been finalized. The file was sealed. His daughter had a new name, a new family, a new life he was not allowed to know about. So, I hired investigators, he said. Year after year, I spent everything. David Vance, I said. How much did they pay him? Samantha closed her portfolio and said, that is what we intend to prove in court. I sat with my backpack on my lap and I told them about the envelope. Last spring, Arthur threw most of my belongings into a garbage bag. I went through the bag before the trash truck came. At the bottom of a box, I found a manila envelope. Inside was a document with the heading Adoption Assistance Monthly Disbursement Summary and across the top typed in plain government font Chloe G. Sterling. I did not know what it meant, but I knew my name was on a government document that Arthur had never shown me. I pulled it out now and handed it to Samantha. She unfolded it and her expression changed. This is the adoption subsidy record, she said. The state has been paying Arthur and Linda Sterling approximately $810 per month for your care for 18 years. That is roughly $175,000. How much of it did you ever see? I thought of the mattress from the curb and the closet with no window. None, I said. Julian turned his face toward the window. All those years, I said half to myself, he called me a burden. But I was not a burden. I was a paycheck. Samantha drove us to a Hilton. Separate rooms, adjoining door, and the first thing I did was stand in the middle of mine and not know what to do. The bed had white sheets that smelled like detergent. There was a window. I opened the curtains and just looked out at the lights. While I stood there, the memories came in layers. I started cooking the family meals when I was 10. Arthur said it was to teach me responsibility. By 12, I was doing all the laundry, all the dishes, all the grocery shopping on foot. Sarah got a new car for her 16th birthday. I got a bus pass that expired after 1 month because nobody renewed it. Arthur never let me keep my own documents. No birth certificate, no social security card, no state ID. When I asked for a driver and Oppo's license at 17, he said, "What for? You do not have anywhere to go." I kept thinking, why did Arthur keep me all those years if he despised me? Now I had the answer. $810 a month. Have you ever met someone who hated you but refused to let you leave? Someone who made you feel like garbage but held on to you like you were gold? If you have, tell me in the comments. Linda's voice echoed in my head. Gratitude, Chloe. That is all we have ever asked for. Is that really so hard? No, Linda. What was hard was realizing I had been grateful to people who were stealing from me. Let me go back 2 weeks before the party. It was a Tuesday evening. Arthur called me into his home office. He was sitting behind the desk like a judge. "Sit down," he said. He pushed a document across the desk. "This is a voluntary agreement," he said. "It states that you choose to remain under my guardianship because you are not financially or emotionally prepared to live independently. Sign it." I picked it up. One clause on page 4 I understood perfectly. The agreement authorized Arthur to continue managing all state and federal benefits associated with the dependent care. He wanted me to sign over my own subsidy again, this time voluntarily so he could keep collecting even after I aged out of the system. "Why do I need to sign this?" I asked. Arthur's expression did not change. "Because without this family, you are on the street. You do not have a degree. You do not have savings. You do not even have an ID. Consider it your gift to me." I did not sign. Arthur said nothing, just put the folder in the desk drawer like you put a loaded gun in a safe. That is why he hit me at the party. It was because I had told him no for the first time in 18 years. The morning after the party, I woke up at 5 a.m. out of habit before I remembered there was no list. A knock on the door. Julian, already dressed, holding 2 cups of coffee. Samantha arrived with a garment bag. "Something clean to wear," she said. I put on the new clothes and looked at myself in the mirror. It was the first time in my life I was wearing something that no one else had worn first. I sat on the edge of the bed and said, "I need proof. I need a DNA test." Julian did not flinch. "Of course. We can go today." The lab technician swabbed our cheeks and told us results would take 5 business days. While we waited, Julian brought an album of photographs. Elena pregnant. Elena holding a newborn. Julian and Elena and the baby in front of a house with a red door. The baby had hazel green eyes even then. "That is the house you came home to," Julian said. "I still own it. I could not bring myself to sell it." I studied each photograph. My mother and Oppo's face, her hands, the way she stood, weight on her left foot, the same way I stand. "She is beautiful," I said. "You look exactly like her," he said. On the 5th day, Samantha called. 99.998% probability of paternity. Julian Whitlock is your biological father. I did not say anything for a while. It was the first proof in 21 years that I was not an accident nobody wanted. "Now we have enough," Samantha said. "The next step is family court." From the court filings, I learned that the morning after the party, Arthur called the police and reported me missing. Not because he was worried, because he was calculating. The officer told Arthur I was an adult and if I left voluntarily, there was no case. "She is mentally unfit," Arthur told the officer. Arthur did not have any documentation of that because I was not unfit. I was just controlled. Arthur was afraid of what I would find out once I was. The source, a wire transfer from Arthur Sterling's personal account. I stared at the numbers. $5,000. That is what my entire identity had cost. My name, my father, my childhood. Traded for the price of a used car. Julian sat across the room, arms folded. So, the adoption can be undone? I asked. Samantha closed the file. Under the law, an adoption procured through fraud can be declared void. Yes, it can be undone. 2 days before the court date, a letter arrived for me. Inside, a photograph of me at 3 years old on Arthur's lap. The letter read, "Chloe, I do not know who this man is, but he is not your father. We are your family. Come home. I forgive you for leaving. Dad. He forgave me for leaving after he hit me." I sat on the bed and felt the room tilt. What if Arthur is right? What if this is all a trick? I looked at Julian and asked, "How do I know you are not the same as him? How do I know you one and oppose, just use me for something else?" He did not look hurt. "You do not," he said. "Not yet. I am not going to try to convince you with words. All I am asking is that you let the evidence speak." That night, I did the math. If Arthur loved me, why did I sleep in a storage closet? If Arthur loved me, why did I not have a single piece of identification? The answer was in the math. Arthur did not love me. Arthur invoiced me. The morning of the hearing, the building was old federal brick. I arrived with Julian and Samantha. Arthur arrived with Linda and Sarah. He looked at me and registered the absence of the girl who used to stare at the floor. Then he saw the banker and Oppo's box of records. The judge was the Honorable Patricia Dwyer. Samantha presented the DNA results and the handwriting analysis. Arthur's lawyer argued it was a settled matter. The judge said the court would hear the full presentation. Samantha moved to the financial records. She projected the disbursement summary onto the screen. Totaling $174,960. Arthur said everything went to the girl. Then a social worker named Derek took the stand. He described my living space and the lack of medical records. "It constitutes neglect," he said. Mrs. Gable took the stand and told the court she watched me work like a servant while Sarah sunbathed. And she told the court she watched Arthur hit me. Then Samantha asked Arthur if he knew David Vance. Arthur said no. Samantha produced a photograph of them together at a church picnic. Arthur said he met him in passing. Then she showed the wire transfer of $5,000. Arthur stood up and yelled that he gave me everything and this was the thanks he got. The judge told him to sit down. I stood up and told the judge I was not there for revenge, but for the truth. I told her about the closet and the lack of a name. Then Linda stood up and said she wrote the check. She said Arthur told her it was to expedite the process and she was tired of protecting him. She said she was afraid of him. The judge took 12 minutes to review the documents. She declared the adoption void. She ordered Arthur and Linda to pay back every cent of the subsidy. And she referred the matter for criminal charges. The child's legal name is restored to Maya Whitlock, she said. Outside, Sarah came up to me crying. She said she did not know about the money. I told her I hoped she figured out who she was without Arthur's money, but that it was her journey, not mine. Arthur was standing on the steps looking diminished. He asked how I could repay him this way after 18 years. "My name is Maya," I said. "And you did not do anything for me. You did everything to me." 6 months later, I have my own apartment with tall windows. I am studying and I am in a culinary program. Richard and I have dinner every Sunday. We are not perfect, but he is there. Arthur and Linda are awaiting trial. Healing does not happen overnight, but I remember where I am. This story isn't and oppose, about revenge. It is about accountability. You deserve to know your own name. Family is the person who sits with you while you learn to trust again. My name is Maya Whitlock, and for the first time in my life, I know exactly who I am. What kind of worthless junk did you give me? My father said. The words did not just come from his mouth, they seemed to vibrate through the very air of the patio, freezing the laughter of 30 elite guests. Then he slapped me. The sound was sharp, like a dry branch snapping in winter. I stood there in front of neighbors and colleagues holding expensive champagne glasses, the same glasses I had polished until my fingers ached. I had scrubbed every inch of that house on my hands and knees since sunrise, ensuring the Walnut Creek sunlight reflected perfectly off the marble counters. But in that moment, all Arthur Sterling saw was a gift wrapped in cheap craft paper. I ran out the front door with nothing but a frayed backpack and a bruise on my cheek that felt like it was on fire. I did not know it then, but that slap was the last thing Arthur Sterling would ever do to me. By midnight, I would be sitting in a black SUV across from a stranger who would say 5 words that would unravel 18 years of systematic lies. Before I go on with this journey of discovery, please take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if you genuinely connect with the reality of this story. Drop a comment telling me where you are watching from and what time it is there. My name is Maya. Though for most of my life, I was forced to answer to the name Chloe. I am 21 years old. Now, let me take you back to that specific Saturday morning, the day Arthur Sterling turned 55. It was supposed to be the crowning achievement of his social calendar. I set my alarm for 5 a.m., just like every Saturday, but the air felt heavier. On the kitchen counter sat a 2-page handwritten list Linda had left for me. It was not a request, it was a command performance. I had to sweep the patio twice because the oak trees always dropped debris. I had to arrange 32 folding chairs in a perfect semicircle, one for each guest on Arthur's prestigious list. I had to press the silk tablecloths until not a single crease remained. I sliced lemons into translucent discs, ensuring they were all exactly the same width. I washed the heavy Pottery Barn serving platters by hand, a task that took hours because the dishwasher always left tiny, unacceptable water spots that Arthur would notice instantly. The Sterling house sat on a quiet cul-de-sac in Walnut Creek, California. It was a 4-bedroom colonial with a lawn so green it looked painted. Arthur hired a professional service to mow it twice a week, but he always told the neighbors I was the one responsible for its upkeep, spinning a tale of how he was teaching me the value of hard work. Inside, the dining table was solid oak, a beast of a furniture piece that seated 12 and required weekly polishing with a specific lemon oil that made my head swim. On the counter stood 2 cases of Napa Valley Cabernet, each bottle costing more than my monthly grocery budget at the diner. The 3-tier cake came from a boutique bakery in San Francisco that charged more for its artisanal fondant than I earned in a full week of double shifts. While the rest of the house was a monument to California success, my room was a different story. It was tucked away downstairs, not in the finished basement where Sarah had her media room, but in a storage closet right next to the thrumming water heater. It had no window to let in the morning sun. My bed was a twin mattress Arthur had literally pulled from a curbside pile when I was 9 years old, claiming it was perfectly fine for a child. I had a single wool blanket that carried the faint scent of damp cardboard no matter how many times I ran it through the heavy-duty wash cycle. Upstairs, Sarah's world was different. She had a queen-sized bed, a flat-screen television, and a vanity mirror ringed with those bright Hollywood bulbs that made her look like a star. She was 23 and still lived at home, her lifestyle fully funded by a credit card linked directly to Arthur's primary account. Sarah had never learned how to boil an egg or start a load of laundry because in her mind, and in Arthur's, that was exactly what I was there for. I had spent 3 grueling months saving every spare dollar for Arthur's birthday gift. I wanted to give him something that looked like it belonged in his world. I chose a leather wallet, genuine calfskin, from a high-end department store. It cost $84. That might not sound like a fortune to some, but when you are earning minimum wage scrubbing grease off sheet pans at a roadside diner, it represents an ocean of sweat. I wrapped it in simple craft paper because after the wallet, I could not even afford a fancy gift bag. I stood in the kitchen at 5 in the morning with flour on my hands and hope in my heart, never imagining that this small token of effort would be the catalyst for my escape. Arthur descended the stairs at 10 a.m. looking every bit the successful insurance executive. He wore a powder blue polo shirt and khakis with creases so sharp they could cut paper. His cologne was a heavy, expensive musk that filled the room before he even entered. He walked out onto the patio like a general inspecting a battlefield. He moved a cluster of balloons 6 inches to the left. He stared at the lemon slices in the water pitcher and told me they were uneven and to do them all over again. Linda appeared at noon, her hair perfectly blown out, wearing a linen dress she had made me steam for 45 minutes. She ran a finger along the counter, looking for dust, and whispered to Arthur that I had only bought him something cheap and to brace himself for the disappointment. Sarah arrived last, her heels clicking rhythmically across the floor I had waxed since dawn. She handed Arthur a brand new Apple Watch, the stainless steel model that retailed for $700. She had charged it to the credit card Arthur gave her for emergencies, but he did not care. He beamed at her and told the arriving guests that she was his girl and always knew what her old man liked. He did not look at me once. To him, I was just the girl who carried the trays and refilled the glasses, a shadow moving through the bright light of his celebration. When a guest asked why I was not sitting down to eat, Linda just gave that cold, practiced smile and said I preferred to help because of my deep gratitude for being adopted. The breaking point happened during the gift ceremony. Arthur sat at the head of the table like a king on a throne. The patio was filled with the sound of clinking glass and polite laughter. I came forward with my small, craft paper package. For a split second, I thought he might appreciate the gesture. But as soon as he saw the wallet, his face twisted in disgust. He held it up like a piece of evidence in a crime. He called it worthless junk and the patio went silent. When I tried to explain how long I had saved, he stood up so fast his chair screeched against the stone. He told me even the dog got better treats than this. Then came the slap. It was a physical manifestation of 18 years of hidden resentment. The world stopped. A champagne glass shattered. No one moved to help me. Sarah just kept filming the whole thing on her phone, her eyes wide with a mix of shock and excitement. That was the moment I realized the gold on the walls of that house was just a thin veneer over a very dark reality. Outside the Sterling estate the October air felt different than it had only hours before. In Walnut Creek the night usually felt like a warm blanket but tonight the wind had a sharp edge that cut through my thin hoodie. The sting on my cheek flared with every step I took as if the ghost of Arthur's hand was still hovering there. I walked along the edge of the asphalt avoiding the pools of light cast by the expensive street lamps. I did not have a car because Arthur claimed I was too irresponsible to drive even though Sarah had a brand new SUV sitting in the driveway. So I walked. My backpack felt like a heavy stone against my spine containing the few scraps of a life I was now leaving behind. Behind me the music from the party finally faded into a dull throb of bass before disappearing entirely. The silence of the suburbs was deliberate and heavy as if the houses themselves were keeping secrets behind their manicured hedges. I had made it about 2 miles toward the main road when I saw the headlights. They were not moving fast but they were steady. A black Cadillac Escalade with tinted windows and California plates slowed to a crawl about 10 feet ahead of me. I felt a surge of cold fear in my stomach. In Walnut Creek a car like that usually belonged to a wealthy neighbor or a security patrol but something about this vehicle felt different. The rear door opened with a soft mechanical whir and every instinct I had developed over 18 years of survival told me to run into the shadows. But I was exhausted. I was tired of being the one who ran and the one who hid. I stood my ground on the sidewalk clutching the straps of my backpack as a man stepped out into the night air. The man was tall and lean, probably in his mid-50s, wearing a charcoal wool coat that looked like it cost more than everything in the Sterling house combined. His hair was a dark brown threaded with silver at the temples and he moved with a quiet authority that was the opposite of Arthur's loud posturing. But it was his eyes that stopped my breath. They were hazel green and wide-set, catching the glare of the street light in a way that made my heart hammer against my ribs. I knew those eyes. I saw them every single morning in my own bathroom mirror. Behind him a woman with sharp features and red hair stepped out carrying a leather portfolio. She stayed a respectful distance back watching me with the professional gaze of a hawk. The man's hands were trembling as he reached toward me, then he pulled them back as if afraid I would shatter. "I am sorry to frighten you," he said, and his voice cracked on the very first word. "My name is Julian Whitlock and I believe I am your biological father." I took a sharp step back until my shoulders hit a cold metal mailbox post. "That is not possible," I told him through grit teeth. "My biological parents did not want me and they gave me up because I was a mistake. That is the story I have been told every day of my life." Julian looked as if I had struck him. "You were told a lie, Maya," he said. He used the name Maya with such natural warmth that it felt like a physical touch. He reached into the inside pocket of his coat and pulled out a small photograph creased at the corners from years of being handled. He handed it to me and I looked down at the image of a woman holding a tiny toddler. The woman had auburn hair and high cheekbones and a smile that tilted slightly to the left. The toddler in her arms had bright hazel green eyes and was reaching for the camera with chubby fingers. "Her name was Elena," Julian said softly. "She was your mother and she was the love of my life. She died in a car accident when you were only 2 years old and I have spent every single day since then trying to find the trail they erased." I looked at the photograph, then at the man standing in front of me and then back at the photograph. The woman in the picture had the same mouth I did and the same way of tilting her head when she was happy. Finding her face felt like finding a word I had been searching for since I learned to speak. The red-haired woman stepped forward then and introduced herself as Samantha Reed, an attorney specializing in family law. She explained that they had been monitoring the Sterling household for months through private investigators. They had seen me working in the yard and they had seen how I was treated compared to Sarah. Tonight when their team saw me run from the house after the party, they knew it was the moment to intervene. "You were watching the house?" I asked, and Samantha nodded solemnly. She told me they saw the birthday party and they saw the moment I ran out. She also mentioned that they saw the bruise on my face. Julian looked at the purple mark on my cheekbone and his jaw tightened until the muscles jumped. "We should get you out of the cold, Maya," he said, and for the first time in my life I stepped into a car because I wanted to, not because I was being forced. Inside the SUV the air was warm and smelled of expensive leather. Julian sat on one side and I sat on the other while Samantha took the front seat and opened her portfolio. Julian began to tell the story of a Tuesday morning in March nearly 19 years ago. He and Elena were driving on the highway when a truck crossed the median. Elena was killed instantly and Julian was sent to the ICU with a shattered pelvis and a collapsed lung. I was at home with a neighbor because I had a slight fever that day. While Julian was fighting for his life on a ventilator, a social worker named David Vance stepped in. Vance claimed that Julian was unfit and that he had signed a voluntary relinquishment of his parental rights. By the time Julian could even breathe on his own, the court had processed the paperwork and I was gone. The adoption was finalized in record time and the records were sealed so tightly that Julian spent nearly 2 decades hitting dead ends. "I never signed a single paper," Julian whispered, looking out the window at the passing lights of Walnut Creek. "I was in a coma when they say I gave you away. But the court had a document with my signature on it and that was enough to steal my daughter." I asked him about David Vance and how much someone like Arthur would have to pay to get a child that way. Samantha looked back from the front seat and said, "That is exactly what we are going to find out." I sat there clutching my backpack and suddenly remembered the manila envelope I had rescued from the trash bag months ago. I pulled the envelope out and handed it to Samantha. I told her I found it in a box Arthur had thrown out when he wanted to clear space for Sarah's new hobbies. Samantha opened it under the dome light of the car and I watched her eyes widen. She told me this was a Title IV Adoption Assistance Disbursement Summary. She explained that the state of California had been paying Arthur and Linda Sterling $810 every single month for 18 years to cover the costs of my care. She did the math out loud and the number hit me like a physical blow. $174,960. That was the price of my childhood. I thought about the curbside mattress and the closet with no window and the bus pass that was never renewed. I was not a burden to them, I realized. I was a very profitable investment. Julian turned to me then and his eyes were full of a pain that went back 18 years. All those times he called you ungrateful, he was collecting a check in your name, he said. We drove to a high-end hotel near the city center. It was a world away from the storage closet by the water heater. Julian checked us in and gave me my own room with an adjoining door. I stood in the middle of that room staring at the white silk duvet and the large window that looked out over the city lights. For the first time I did not have to ask permission to turn on the light or use the bathroom. I stood at the window for a long time watching the cars go by and thinking about the math of my life. Arthur had been paid to hate me while my real father had spent a fortune just to find me. I realized then that the walls of the Sterling house were built on a foundation of stolen money and forged names. Every time Linda talked about gratitude, she was really talking about her own bank account. Every time Arthur hit me, he was hitting a girl who had technically paid for the very roof over his head. I looked at the bruise in the hotel mirror and it did not look like a mark of shame anymore. It looked like the final receipt for a debt I never owed. I knew the next few days would be a storm of lawyers and tests, but as I lay down on those clean white sheets I felt a strange kind of peace. The lie was over and the truth was finally starting to breathe. Twas e teep tuc viet teep fan 3 voi noi dung duak mo rong toida, tap trung sao veo tom ly nan vat va kak tim tit du trada dam bao du di theo u ka kwa ban. Van fong van junet gon gue voi nuoi mai. Boi can California va tuet doi kong dung down goak kep he dao gach dao dome. Part 3, The Truth in the Mirror. Word count, 2,420 words. The morning at the Hilton felt like waking up in a different dimension. For the first time in 21 years I did not wake up to the sound of Arthur slamming the kitchen cabinets or the high-pitched vibration of the water heater next to my mattress. I woke up to a room filled with soft gray light coming through a massive window that looked out over the skyline. I stayed under the covers for a long time, feeling the weight of the silk duvet and listening to the silence of a room that was mine alone. My body still expected a list of chores to be waiting on the counter, but the only thing waiting for me was a quiet knock on the adjoining door. Julian was there when I opened it, holding 2 cups of steaming coffee and looking at me with a mixture of hope and terror. He did not try to hug me or push his way into my space, and that small act of restraint felt like more of a gift than anything the Sterlings had ever given me. After breakfast, Samantha Reed arrived with a garment bag containing a pair of new jeans and a cream-colored cashmere sweater that still had the tags on it. She told me it was something clean to wear and that we had a long day ahead of us. I took the clothes into the bathroom and looked at myself in the full-length mirror. It was the first time I was wearing something that had not been a hand-me-down from Sarah or a clearance item bought as an afterthought. I looked like a person who belonged in the sunlight rather than a shadow hidden in a basement. When I walked back into the room, Julian's eyes went red at the edges, but he did not cry. He told me that my mother Elena had that same look whenever she was deciding whether or not to trust her own reflection. I sat on the edge of the bed and looked Julian in the eye because I needed to be sure. I told him that I needed proof and that a story and a photograph were not enough for me to give him my heart. I told him I needed a DNA test, and if he was who he said he was, the science would have to back it up. I expected him to be offended or to act like his feelings were hurt, but he just nodded with a look of deep respect. He said of course we can go today, and that Samantha had already located a lab in Richmond that was accredited and professional. He told me that I had spent my whole life doing what I was told, and if I was going to trust him it should be because I chose to and not because I had nowhere else to go. The drive to the lab was quiet but not uncomfortable. We passed through neighborhoods that looked exactly like Walnut Creek, but now they felt different to me. They felt like stage sets where people performed the role of a happy family while hiding the truth in their storage closets. When we arrived at the brick building, the technician in scrubs swabbed the inside of my cheek and then did the same for Julian. They labeled the vials and told us the results would take 3 to 5 business days. 5 days felt like a lifetime to wait for an identity, but Julian spent that time showing me pieces of the life that had been stolen. He brought over a heavy leather album filled with photos of a woman who looked so much like me it was haunting. I saw pictures of Elena pregnant and laughing on a porch swing in the Fan District. I saw her holding a newborn baby with a pink hat and hazel eyes that were already wide with curiosity. Julian pointed to a photo of a brick bungalow with a bright red door and told me that was the house I came home to. He told me he still owned it because he could never bring himself to sell the last place we were all together. I studied those photos for hours, memorizing the way she stood with her weight on her left foot, which was exactly how I stood when I was tired. It was a kind of evidence that a DNA test could never provide. It was the evidence of blood and bone and the silent language of a mother and daughter who were never supposed to be apart. While we waited for the results, Samantha began to dig deeper into the financial records she had pulled from the state database. She showed me a ledger that tracked the $810 a month that Arthur and Linda had been receiving. She pointed out that there were no records of dental visits or medical checkups after I turned 14. She asked me how I had handled being sick, and I told her the truth, that I was told to stay in my closet and not to bother them until the fever broke. I told her about the time I had a deep cut on my hand from a broken glass and I had to superglue it shut because Arthur said a trip to the ER was a waste of a Saturday. Samantha's pen moved fast across her legal pad and I could see the case against them growing like a storm on the horizon. On the 5th day the call finally came. I was sitting on the hotel bed looking at a photo of my mother blowing out candles on her 24th birthday when my phone buzzed. It was Samantha. She told me the probability was 99.998% and that it was confirmed. Julian Whitlock was my biological father. I did not say anything for a long time and I just held the phone to my ear as the world finally shifted into its correct place. It was not just a number to me, it was the first proof in 21 years that I was not an accident or an unwanted burden. I was a daughter who had been searched for across decades and a father had never stopped looking for me even when the trail went cold. I walked into the adjoining room and Julian was standing by the window. I did not have to say a word because he could see the answer in my eyes. He held out his arms and this time I did not pull away. He smelled like cedar and old books and he held me with a strength that felt like it could hold back the entire world. He whispered that he was so sorry it took him so long, and I realized that for the first time in my life I was not just being tolerated, I was being loved. But even in that moment of relief I knew that the battle was just beginning. We had the truth, but now we had to take it into a courtroom and tear down the wall of lies that Arthur Sterling had built to protect his comfortable life in Walnut Creek. Samantha called a meeting that evening to go over the strategy for family court. She told us that under California law an adoption built on fraud and forgery could be declared void from the very beginning. She showed us a report from a handwriting expert who had compared the signature on the relinquishment form to Julian's actual signature from 20 years ago. The expert's conclusion was that the signature on the form was a blatant forgery, likely done by someone who had access to Julian's files while he was in the hospital. I realized then that Arthur's insurance agency likely had those files and he had used his professional access to steal a child for a monthly paycheck. I told Samantha about the time Arthur tried to get me to sign a voluntary guardianship paper just 2 weeks before the party. I told her he had called me into his office and tried to intimidate me into signing away my rights so he could keep the money flowing even after I turned 21. He had told me I was nothing without them and that I would end up on the street if I did not sign. I remembered the look of cold fury in his eyes when I asked for more time to think about it. Now I understood that the slap on the patio was not just about a wallet, it was about his fear that he was losing his longest-running financial investment. I felt a cold clarity settle over me as I looked at the documents on the table. Arthur Sterling was not just a mean man, he was a criminal who had traded my life for a ledger of monthly disbursements. Trois et type tuc viet type fan for voi noi dung duok mo rong toida, tap trung veo qua trin chuan by bang chung va and hung gok qua trong and mu qua Arthur Sterling de dam bao du di theo you call. Part 4, The Legal Battle. Word count, 2,350 words. The days leading up to the court date were a blur of intense preparation and cold revelations. Samantha Reed turned the hotel conference room into a command center, filling the walls with timelines and copies of financial records that traced every dollar the Sterlings had ever received for my care. I spent hours sitting across from her and Julian recounting every detail of my life in Walnut Creek. We talked about the lack of doctor visits and the way Arthur and Linda would hide me in the basement whenever the social worker made their rare and brief scheduled appearances. It became clear that the system had not just failed me, it had been manipulated with surgical precision. Samantha handed me a document one afternoon that felt like a lead weight in my hands. It was a bank record from October 2005 showing a personal checking account belonging to David Vance, the social worker who had handled my emergency foster placement. Just 6 days before my adoption was finalized, a deposit of $5,000 appeared in his account. The source was a direct wire transfer from Arthur Sterling's personal savings. It was not a donation to a charity or a fee paid to an agency. It was a direct payment from the man who wanted a child to the man who could give her to him. I stared at that number for a long time. $5,000. That was the price Arthur had paid to erase my father's name and buy himself 18 years of government subsidies. I asked Samantha if this was enough to put Arthur in jail, and she looked at me with a serious expression. She told me that while the civil court would handle the annulment of the adoption, the evidence of bribery and forgery would be turned over to the district attorney for criminal prosecution. Julian sat at the end of the table, his hands clenched so tight his knuckles were white. He told me that he had spent nearly 2 decades wondering why his daughter had been taken from him while he lay broken in a hospital bed, and now he finally had a name and a face to blame. He had been a victim of a man who saw a tragedy and saw it as an opportunity for profit. As we prepared the case, we reached out to Mrs. Gable, my old neighbor. She had lived next to the Sterlings for 12 years and had seen more than she ever let on. In a sworn affidavit, she described how Sarah was treated like a princess while I was treated like a servant. She recalled the time I was outside washing Arthur's car in a rainstorm while the family sat inside by the fireplace. Most importantly, she provided a detailed account of the night of the birthday party. She testified that the slap Arthur gave me was not an isolated incident of temper but the climax of a long pattern of domestic labor and emotional abuse. Having her support felt like a shield against the lies I knew Arthur would tell in front of a judge. One evening, a courier arrived at the hotel with a letter addressed to Chloe Sterling. I knew without opening it that it was from Arthur. Inside was a handwritten note on his insurance agency letterhead and a single photograph. It was a picture of me at 4 years old sitting on his lap in the living room wearing a pink dress. We were both smiling, and if you did not know the truth you would think we were the perfect family. The letter read that he did not know who this stranger was or what he was telling me, but that they were my real family. He told me he forgave me for leaving and that I should come home before I made a mistake I would regret. The word forgive made me feel physically ill. He was forgiving me for running away after he had struck me in front of his friends. He was forgiving me for discovering the truth about his fraud. I showed the letter to Julian, who read it twice before setting it on the table. He told me that people like Arthur use the language of love to maintain control when they have nothing else left. He said that Arthur was not afraid of losing a daughter because he never saw me as one. He was afraid of losing the status and the money that came with my presence in his house. Julian's calm strength helped me realize that Arthur's letter was not an act of affection, it was a final desperate attempt to protect his investment. We also spent time with a social worker named Derek Simmons, who had been assigned by the court to review the petition for annulment. He was a quiet man with a square jaw who did not show much emotion, but he was incredibly thorough. He visited the Sterling house and took photographs of the storage closet where I had slept for 18 years. He noted the lack of a window and the proximity to the loud vibrating water heater. He compared my living conditions to Sarah's lavish bedroom and concluded that the treatment I received was inconsistent with any standard of child welfare. When he finished his report, he told me that what happened in that house was a textbook case of exploitation under the guise of adoption. The night before the hearing, I sat by the window in my hotel room and wrote in a small notebook. I did not write about my anger or my fear. I wrote about the person I wanted to become once this was over. I thought about the culinary classes I wanted to take and the apartment I wanted to find for myself. For the first time, I was not thinking about how to survive the next hour, I was thinking about how to live the next year. I realized that the court case was just a door I had to walk through to get to the rest of my life. No matter what happened in that courtroom, I would never again be the girl who polished the oak table and waited for permission to exist. I talked to Julian for a long time that night about my mother Elena. He told me about the way she loved the ocean and how she used to dream of opening a small bakery in the city. He said that she had a spirit that could not be contained, and he saw that same spirit in me. Hearing stories about her made me feel like I had a foundation that was older and stronger than the lies of the Sterlings. I was not just a girl from a storage closet in Walnut Creek. I was the daughter of Elena and Julian, and I had a history that was full of genuine love and sacrifice. Samantha walked us through the final checklist for the hearing. We had the DNA results, the handwriting analysis, the bank records, and the testimonies from Mrs. Gable and Derek Simmons. It was a mountain of evidence that was designed to be irrefutable. She told me that the judge would likely give Arthur a chance to speak and warned me to stay calm no matter what he said. I told her that I was not afraid of him anymore because I knew his secret. Arthur Sterling was just a man who had built a life out of stolen pieces, and tomorrow I was going to take my piece back. The morning of the final hearing in the Richmond family court felt like the air before a massive Pacific storm. The sky over Virginia was a deep bruised purple, and the wind was kicking up fallen leaves against the brick walls of the courthouse. I arrived at the building at 8:30 with Julian on my left and Samantha on my right. Derek Simmons followed closely behind, carrying a heavy banker's box filled with the documentary evidence of my childhood. I was wearing the navy blazer and charcoal slacks Julian had bought me, and for the first time in my life I felt like the clothes actually belonged to the person wearing them. I stood tall with my shoulders back and my eyes focused on the heavy oak doors of the courtroom. I was no longer the shadow in the corner of a Walnut Creek patio. I was Maya Whitlock, and I was there to reclaim my life. Arthur arrived 10 minutes later, looking like a man who was still convinced he could charm his way out of any situation. He wore a gray tailored suit and a burgundy tie, and he had Linda on his arm. She was dressed in an expensive designer outfit, but her face was pale and her eyes were darting around the hallway. Sarah trailed behind them, looking bored and tapping away on her phone as if this were just another inconvenient errand. When Arthur saw us, his expression flickered for a brief second. He saw the way I was standing, and he saw the man beside me who shared my eyes. He realized in that moment that the variables had changed and he was no longer the one in control of the narrative. He tried to catch my eye with a look of paternal disappointment, but I did not look away. I held his gaze until he was the one who had to turn his head. The clerk called the case and we walked into the courtroom. The room smelled of old paper and floor wax, and the silence was heavy with the weight of legal history. Judge Patricia Dwyer took the bench and looked at us over her reading glasses with a sharp analytical gaze. Samantha stood up and began the presentation of our case. She was precise and relentless. She projected the DNA results on the screen, showing the 99.998% probability of paternity. She then introduced the forensic handwriting report that proved the signature on the relinquishment form was a forgery. The room was so quiet you could hear the soft humming of the overhead lights as the judge reviewed the documents. Arthur's lawyer tried to argue that the adoption was a settled matter, but Judge Dwyer shut him down immediately, stating that a decree built on fraud is never settled. Then came the financial evidence. Samantha showed the ledger of the adoption subsidies and the wire transfer of $5,000 to David Vance. She called Derek Simmons to the stand and he described the storage closet where I had spent 18 years. He showed photos of the water heater and the curbside mattress, comparing them to the lavish photos of Sarah's bedroom. I watched Linda's face as these details were read aloud, and I saw her start to crumble. She began to cry quietly into a lace handkerchief while Arthur sat stone-faced staring at the table. Mrs. Gable took the stand next and told the court about the night of the birthday party and the long years of watching me work while the rest of the family enjoyed the California sunshine. Her testimony was the final nail in the coffin of the Sterlings' reputation. When it was my turn to speak, I stood up and addressed the judge directly. I told her that I was not there to seek revenge but to seek the truth. I explained that for 21 years I had been told I was a burden and an accident. I told her about the long nights in the storage closet and the way I was made to feel invisible in my own home. I said that Arthur had not given me a family, he had given me a contract. He had used me to fund his lifestyle while treating me like a servant. I looked at Arthur then and told him that his power over me ended the moment I saw my mother's face in a photograph. I told the judge that I deserved to have a name that was mine and a history that was real. When I sat down I felt a massive weight lift off my chest. I had finally used my voice and the world had not ended. The most unexpected moment came when Linda Sterling stood up without her lawyer's permission. She was shaking and her voice was high and thin. She confessed to the court that she had written the check to David Vance because Arthur told her it was the only way to get a child quickly. She admitted that she had watched Arthur hit me and that she had been too afraid of losing her comfortable life to say anything. She looked at me and said she was sorry, but the words felt empty after 18 years of silence. Arthur turned a deep shade of crimson and tried to grab her arm, but the judge warned him that any further outburst would result in him being held in contempt. The mask of the perfect Walnut Creek family had been ripped away, leaving nothing but the ugly reality of greed and cowardice. Judge Dwyer did not take long to make her ruling. She declared that the adoption was void from its inception because it was built on a foundation of forgery and bribery. She ordered Arthur and Linda to pay back every single cent of the $174,000 in subsidies they had stolen from the state. She also stated that she was referring the entire matter to the district attorney for criminal prosecution. Most importantly, she ordered that my legal name be restored to Maya Whitlock effective immediately. The sound of her gavel hitting the wood was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of a prison door opening. It was the sound of 18 years of lies finally coming to an end. After the hearing, Sarah tried to talk to me in the hallway, but I had nothing left to say to her. I told her that I hoped she found a way to live a life that was not paid for by someone else's suffering. Arthur stood at the bottom of the courthouse steps looking like a man who had finally run out of options. He asked me how I could do this to the people who raised me, and I told him that he had never raised me, he had only used me. I walked away with Julian and Samantha and I did not look back. We got into the black SUV and drove away from the courthouse, leaving the Sterling standing in the cold October wind. We drove toward the Fan District and the brick bungalow with the red door. 6 months have passed since that day in court. I live in a beautiful studio apartment in Richmond with massive windows that let in the morning light. I spend my days studying for my exams and attending classes at the local culinary school. I am learning to cook because I want to, not because I have to. I am learning the chemistry of flavors and the art of presentation, and every time I plate a dish I feel a sense of pride that Arthur could never take away. Julian and I have dinner every Sunday at the house with the red door. We are still learning how to be a father and a daughter, but the foundation is built on truth, and that makes all the difference. He tells me stories about my mother and I tell him about my dreams for the future. The Sterlings are currently awaiting trial for fraud and child neglect. Their house in Walnut Creek is up for sale to cover the restitution payments, and their standing in the community has vanished. But I do not spend my time thinking about them. I am too busy living. I go to therapy every week to work through the memories of the storage closet and the years of being told I was nothing. My therapist tells me that healing is not a destination but a journey, and I am finally on the right path. I want anyone listening to this to know that you are not the labels people put on you. You are not a burden and you are not an accident. You have a name and a story, and you have the right to be seen. My name is Maya Whitlock, and for the first time in my life I am exactly where I am supposed to be.